The Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return, sponsored by Narconon Ojai.
Hello, welcome to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. My name is Joni Siegel, and I'm the hostess for this podcast, or host. I figure host works both ways. The producer for this show is Steve Siegel, my husband. And if you have any interest in telling your story on the podcast, please reach out to us. Our email is theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com. We answer our emails. We'll get back to you pretty quickly. So definitely reach out if you have a story you'd like to tell or just something you'd like to share with us. Today's interview is with a gentleman named Theo Fleury. Theo Flurry is a Canadian former professional ice hockey player. He played for the Calgary Flames, Colorado Avalanche, New York Rangers, and Chicago Blackhawks of the National Hockey League, Tappara of Finland's SM Liga, and the Belfast Giants of the UK's Elite Ice Hockey League. He was drafted by the Flames in the 8th round, and he played over 1,000 games in the NHL between 1989 and 2003. He twice represented Canada at the Winter Olympics, winning a gold medal in 2002. Throughout his career, he battled drug and alcohol addictions that ultimately forced him out of the NHL in 2003. Fleury co-wrote a book called Playing with Fire, a best-selling autobiography released in October 2009, in which he revealed that he had been sexually abused by former coach Graham James. Fleury filed a criminal complaint against James, who subsequently pleaded guilty to charges of sexual assault. Fleury traveled to Vancouver in 2013, where he assisted and co-hosted the 19th Annual Aboriginal Achievement Awards. Additionally, he hosts the Theo Flurry 14 Hockey Camp, which helps to teach, inspire, and educate young hockey players ages 6 to 16. Fleury has since become an advocate for sexual abuse victims and developed a career as a public speaker. He was a recipient of the Inspire Award in the sports category in 2013. Let's talk to Theo Fleury. Theo, thank you so much for being on the podcast today and being willing to share your story. We know that when people share their story, there are similarities, there are differences, but we always feel like somebody listening is going to get something out of your story and reach out for help, and that's the whole purpose.
That's what it should be all about always, right?
Exactly.
And it was funny when I started on this journey, when I told my own story, I had no idea what the hell I was getting myself into and quickly realized the enormity of, the epidemic of trauma, mental health, and addiction. And around that time, I had a spiritual teacher, right? Because the first 3 steps of the program is finding a God of my own understanding, right? And so I said to her, she's a very wise person. 40 some odd years ago, she was living on Skid Row in Winnipeg and picked herself up, dusted herself off, and just became this incredible human being. And so I said to her, Grandma, I said, I'm completely overwhelmed and I don't have a clue what the hell I'm doing. And you know what she said to me? She said, one person at a time.
Truer words, I mean, that's the whole thing. It's going to be one person at a time. But Theo, let me, the way I kind of like to start, and I really appreciate you telling that story, is how did your journey to drugs and alcohol and addiction, how did that all start with you?
Yep. So both my parents experienced childhood trauma in their life, and that manifested itself into addictions. So my mom was severely depressed. And so in the 60s, you remember that wonder drug for absolutely everything on the planet called Valium?
Yep.
So she was prescribed Valium early in her teenage life, and she got addicted to it. And then my dad was an alcoholic. And so I grew up in this very chaotic, violent, completely insane environment for, the first 15 years of my life. And then as a phenom hockey player, I ran into a coach and a scout who basically promised me a one-way ticket to the NHL if I followed and listened to his advice. And what happened over a 2.5-year period of hanging out with this guy, he raped me 150 times. And so what I was left with was a lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of anger, a lot of resentment, and there wasn't one person in the world I could have told. Because
Theo,
hockey,
I'm just gonna interrupt you just for a second and tell you that I, as a mother, am sorry that that happened to you. That should never happen to a young person. I'm sorry.
No. Well, and it's hard to believe that child trafficking is now a $1 billion industry on the planet, right? So
Just wrong.
exactly. And so it wasn't too long after that I discovered alcohol as a coping mechanism from all of the emotional pain and suffering that I was experiencing from those two traumatic experiences as a child and as an adolescent. And I would say from the very first sip of alcohol that I was an instant alcoholic. And then, as I progressed and started adding marijuana and street drugs and all of that, which is, a typical story of somebody who's experienced some sort of traumatic experience in their life, and they use that as a coping mechanism. And then eventually, I got to the point where 16 years ago, I had a fully loaded pistol in my mouth, ready to pull the trigger and, end my life. Not because I wanted to die, but because I was completely exhausted from living in emotional pain and suffering for the majority of my life. And I tried everything on the planet to get rid of this, this feeling.
I was watching one of your videos, Theo, and it said that you didn't sleep for 27 years. And I don't understand how you survived at all, not being able to sleep.
Well, we'll get to the reason and the purpose why I'm here. But, I was molested in a dark room. Okay. So I could never see my abuser, and he would wait till I was asleep. And then he would, attack me. So, I had severe PTSD for that whole entire time. And that's why I couldn't sleep, is because every time I laid my head on the pillow, all I would see was this scene, right? And so, yeah, like I needed alcohol, I needed drugs, because it would at least allow me to fall asleep. Otherwise without it, I would just lay awake and stare at the ceiling, right? And
I can totally understand how that would happen. If I had experienced what you had experienced, drugs and alcohol, that would be the way to go. It just would. I mean, how else are you supposed to cope with it?
Yeah. Well, and as a child too, like my father, because I was my mom's protector, right? I would have to wait up to see what kind of shape my dad was going to be in. Is he going to be the happy drunk, or is he going to be the, the angry guy? And, my mom would also poke the bear too, right? And so, as a 5-year-old, I got my referee jersey on, standing in the middle of my parents, like keeping them from,
Not something a 5-year-old should have to
no,
do,
no.
And I have a question, Theo. You said your mom, when she was a teenager, um, became addicted to Valium. Was that pretty much all she ever took in terms of
Yeah,
drugs?
yeah, yeah. So she's been hooked on some sort of pharmaceutical drug now for, geez, probably 50 years.
Still.
Yeah. And she is in a home and she's barely functioning. So,
I'm sorry.
all of the side effects from big pharma, you know, and to be honest with you, I don't know how she's still alive, but she has a certain will, I guess, to live, but it's really hard and it's really sad to see, you know, somebody that you love and care about go down that road, right?
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, she doesn't really want help, and when you don't want help, you can't be helped, right?
Exactly.
And so yeah, so I was carrying all of this pain, emotional pain, around. And like I said, I had a gun in my mouth, and was too chicken to pull the trigger. And I said to myself, well, geez, I guess I want to live, and so I better change some things, right?
Now, was this
So
during your hockey career or
no,
after
this was
your?
this was after. This was
Okay.
after. Yeah. And like 6 months after I sort of left the game, this is what happened. And
So you were pretty much I guess we could say like a functioning addict or a functioning alcoholic throughout your hockey career. Is
till
that?
till the end, till the end. And you know, people think that my addiction took me out of the game. That is completely false. What took me out of the game was I could no longer manage my mental health because I suffer from severe depression, panic and anxiety disorder. And towards the end of my career, um, nobody was talking about mental health in, late 90s, right? And so they put me on this cocktail of pharmaceuticals to, manage and then I was drinking at the same time. And so, and it was no longer fun anymore. Like it wasn't my happy place like it used to be, when I was a kid. And so, I don't like the word addiction because it has so much shame attached to it. Okay. So I've sort of changed the word addiction to emotional pain management is what it is.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. There's so much stigma attached to addiction. And what people don't understand is that the addiction is actually the solution to a problem.
Yes.
And the problem is underlying the addiction.
Yeah. Well, and there are several layers of that onion that, that need to be peeled off. And what's funny is, we're going through COVID here and the coronavirus, is that the liquor stores and the dope shops are essential services.
And they're delivering. They'll deliver it to your house. You can call up and say, can I have a bottle of something, and get it.
Geez, I wish I was an addict or an alcoholic now. It would have been easy,
Seriously. Theo, what drugs did the psychs put you on?
Oh, I was on them all. Paxil, Zoloft, you name it, all of it. Yeah. So.
And did you take those at all while you were playing hockey, or?
Yep. Clonazepam. Oh, there's a good one.
Yeah.
I remember the last treatment center I went to, I was on clonazepam. And so when I went for my assessment with the doctor, he was like, "Why are you on this stuff, clonazepam?" I said, "I don't know." I said, the NHL doctors prescribe this for anxiety and depression and all that. And so basically, for 30 days while I was in treatment, all I did was shake all day long coming off the clonazepam. So I didn't really learn anything while I was there because I was, physically ill, you know?
Wow.
And and so yeah, so September 18th, 2005 was the day that I got sober, and the day that I started down this path of healing and sobriety and all this really interesting stuff, right? And
Now, you say it very easily, but how did you get sober?
well, um so the night before, I was living with a girl, and for the first 6 months of our relationship, we partied together. And like every other relationship in my life, it was going down the same road, going down the same path, because there's always one common denominator in all these relationships, and that's me and this big pile of shit that I carry into each relationship. And so her and I had this horrible argument. I was left in the washroom on my hands and knees. And so I remembered a conversation that I had when I was living in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I was trying to get sober. Okay. I went to treatment there, got my first AA sponsor, got plugged into recovery in Santa Fe, which is probably one of the best places I've ever been to for recovery. And I used to go to an all men's meeting every Wednesday night in this guy's backyard. It was just a beautiful, beautiful place. And so one night after meeting, I was outside having a cigarette after the meeting, and this old guy, this old biker guy, who was one of the most handsome fellas I've ever seen. He had beautiful, long white hair, and he was still kind of toned and ripped, and he had this great tan, and he had this permanent whiskey voice. And he used to introduce himself at meetings all the time, Jack Alcoholic, So I'm standing outside having a smoke, and he comes outside and he says, "Hey kid, how you doing?" And I was like, "Not very good." I said, "I'm barely hanging on." And then he said, "How are you doing with your higher power?" And I looked at him, and I was kind of like confused, and I was like, it's not happening.
What higher power?
Exactly. And then he said something to me I'll never forget. He said, "Do you realize in this program that you get to pick your own God?" And I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Pick my own God? Really?" Because my experience with religion was Sundays, I was an altar boy in the Catholic Church. And then on Thursday nights, I went to my mom's Jehovah Witness Bible study. Okay.
Wow.
So a very punitive look at spirituality and a cult. Okay. They basically told me that the world was going to end at any point. Okay. So I'm going, pick my own God. Well, I only have two perspectives here. Okay. And I don't want any part of either one. Right. And so here I am on the washroom floor. I'm crying. I'm like disheveled. I punched a hole in the wall and I'm angry. And I remember this conversation I had with Jack. So I said, okay, I'm going to give this God of my own understanding a shot. So I went up one side of God. I went down the other side of God. I called him every single name in the book that I could think of. I made up a couple of my own. And then I said to him, God, I realize you only give me as much as I can handle. I said, I am full. I go, you can't put one more thing on my plate. And then at the end of the conversation, I said, please, 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 God, take away the obsession to drink and do drugs. And I went to bed. And the next morning I got up, and in my house at that time, on my way to the washroom, I had to walk by this really massive mirror. And so as I'm walking, wiping the sleep out of my eyes, I glance out of the corner of my eye and I stop dead in my tracks. And I'm staring at myself in the mirror for the first time, and I don't know how long, because I couldn't look at myself because of the shame, because of the guilt, because of, all this stuff.
Wow.
And so I started staring, 10 minutes goes by, 20 minutes goes by, 30 minutes goes by. And finally I went, holy shit, my prayer's been answered. And that was September 18th of 2005. And I haven't had a drink or a drug since.
Wow. Very, very well done, you.
Yeah.
I want to make a comment on this gentleman that you were talking to about I'm assuming it was a 12-step program.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I think that my understanding has been that the majority of the 12-step programs are very Christian oriented, which of course
Well, they use the word God, which scares the majority of people because most of us are pissed off at God, right?
Right.
And so, I don't subscribe to the white bearded guy in the sky. Okay.
Understood.
I don't get that concept. But when Jack approached me with a God of my own understanding, the light bulb went on, right?
I'm telling you, I think it's huge, Theo. I had a young man who was a co-host for the first year we did the podcast, and he was raised in the Jewish faith. But when he went to a 12-step program, because of the way it was addressed to him, he could not relate to it. And I think that what I'm getting from what you're saying is that anybody listening, you make your own decision about God, and it is not dictated to you by any group, church, or any individual. It's your own decision and your own relationship.
Yeah. Well, instead of religion, I get the word spirituality, right?
Exactly.
Because in the healing process, there's three things that we need to heal: our physical being, our emotional being, and our spiritual being, right?
Exactly.
And, I got the physical part, I got the emotional part, but I kept butting my head up against, this final thing. And most addicts and alcoholics that I work with have that problem. But the first 3 steps in the program is all about spirituality, right?
Interesting.
And if you skip over, the steps are there in order for a reason, right?
Right.
And so I kept skipping over those first 3 steps, the powerlessness, finding something greater than myself that could restore myself to sanity, all of these things. And ultimately, what I think spirituality is all about relationship. Okay.
Yep.
Because my trauma happened in relationship.
Yep.
Okay. So how am I going to heal? Well, I'm going to heal in relationship.
Makes
And
sense.
the one relationship that I neglected the most was the relationship I had with myself, right? Because after my abuser left my life, guess what happened? I abused myself. I took over the abuse. Right? Because in every relationship, I was abandoned. Secondly, I didn't feel good enough. Thirdly, I didn't feel lovable. And the fourth thing, do I even exist?
Wow.
Right? And that ultimately is what trauma teaches us. And those become the core beliefs of who we think we are
Right.
until we start to have a relationship with ourselves. And the better relationship we have with ourselves, the better all of our relationships with other people, places, and things will be the same.
Exactly. You are listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return. For more information on the podcast or to reach out if you have a story you would like to share with us, go to our Facebook page by the same name, or you can email us at theaddictionpodcast@yahoo.com, or go to our website, theaddictionpodcast.com, or call us at 727-314-7080. And please remember to subscribe to our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts and give us a 5-star review. For more information on our sponsor, Narconon Ojai, visit their website at narcononojai.org. That's NARCONONOJAI.org. Or call 1-866-231-5924. That's 1-866-231-5924. Sometimes, the hardest thing about getting someone into recovery is getting them to agree to treatment. Bobby Newman, a certified drug counselor with 30 years experience and an over 85% success rate as an interventionist, has created a series of 12 videos that you can use right now to learn every step to get your loved one to agree to treatment. Call 1-833-918-0008 today and say the word podcast to get a 10% discount. Or go to newmaninterventions.com and type in the word podcast for a 10% discount. This service comes with a free 1-hour consultation with Bobby.
If I don't love myself, I can't be in a relationship with somebody else and love them. Right?
Nope.
And so, recovery is all about self. And, I've always heard this comment, oh, it's really selfish of you to, well, no, without this, I got nothing.
Right.
You remember the old guy, selfish, self-centered, fucking asshole. That's who that guy was. Right?
Right.
Do you like the guy you see in front of you right now? Yes, I do. Well, I had to go on this journey to discover for the first time in my life that I could be by myself and be okay with being by myself, because I could never do that.
Wow.
And so I
just,
wrote a
I just want to stop you for a second. So you're
Yep.
standing in front of this mirror, and that we could say that and or when you had the gun in your mouth was sort of your point of no return, where you realized you had to move forward. What are some of the things that you did to move forward from that point to improve your life?
Well, the first thing I did was I made a promise to myself that no matter what happened to me for the rest of my life, that I wasn't going to drink and I wasn't going to pick up a drug.
Wow.
Okay. Because, that pile of shit that I was carrying around was like enormous. And I knew that if I drank or picked up again, that pile would only get higher.
Right.
And not only that, it would cause me to be more isolated, more alone, more bitter, more angry, et cetera, et cetera. And so, even though I got sober, I still have the ism. Okay. And that's the part that's going to get me in trouble. And so I needed to work on that ism part to change my belief system, how I thought about myself, all of these things. And, I've hit more rock bottoms in sobriety than I ever did drinking, because I'm actually feeling my feelings for the very first time in my life.
Isn't
Right?
that interesting? Because when you're doing drugs or alcohol, you don't know that it's bottom because you
No,
don't feel it.
you're suppressing and you're numbing out those feelings, right?
Right.
And you know, I was a really angry guy. Okay. That's what made me such a successful hockey player was I was angry, right? And
Kind of a
anger,
brutal sport, kind of,
yeah,
isn't it?
it's awesome. I loved it. The best anger management class I could have ever gone to was called the NHL because I could go out on the ice and beat the shit out of somebody and they'd put me in the box for 5 minutes and they wouldn't put handcuffs on me for assault, you know?
legal legal license to assault.
Yes.
That's funny.
Yeah. But really what was I was really sad. Okay? Because that's what anger is anger is sadness turned inward. And I never, well, in a macho sport like mine, how am I going to get to my sadness pieces, which is the biggest piece I need to heal in myself you know, is that sadness, right?
That's right. You can't very well cry as a
Yeah.
big macho hockey
Yeah,
player.
exactly. And so, um, you know, I wrote a second book called Conversations with a Rattlesnake is the name of the book. And I wrote it with a neuroscientist. Okay. And what she told me was that she could help me through relationship and conversation. She could help me rewire all of my trauma.
Huh.
Okay. And, the book is a 4-year conversation between the two of us where she is helping me rewire my brain and rewire my trauma. Right.
Interesting.
And that has come to fruition. And it has been an amazing, amazing experience. That has been an amazing experience to um, have somebody who is relentlessly positive, um, stuck by me the whole entire way and walked me through this journey of, because our brains are neuroplastic, right? Which means, you know, rewiring, can happen.
Right.
And what did I need to rewire was those 4 things: abandonment, not good enough, not lovable, do I even exist? Those were the
Right.
things that I need to rewire.
Right. This was your
And
second book. What was your first book?
my first book was just about my life, right? I put it all out on paper, and it's called Playing with Fire. And it's quite the read. There
I'm
was a
sure.
there was a review from one of the big newspapers in Canada called the Globe and Mail, and basically the review was, "We can't believe this guy survived his own life." you
Yep.
know, so um,
I feel the same way listening to you tell it.
yeah,
I'm amazed that you not only made it to the NHL, you were a huge hockey star and made it through all of that with what you had experienced as a young person. It's amazing. I
yeah,
mean, you have to if nothing else take a win that you made it that far.
oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I'm donating my body to science after because
I love it.
I don't know how I did it. But that is a comment that I get all the time at speaking engagements or book signings or whatever, is people come up to me and say, "I can't believe you're still here." You know?
And it's huge because I say this whenever we have a story that has some horrific element to it. It's like a lot of the people listening, I don't think their lives were that bad. And so if someone like you, Theo, can fully confront and get past their background and their childhood abuse, well, the average Joe who listens to this podcast can get help and get past it.
Yeah. But there's one thing that I'll give you a little bit of pushback on is, a lot of people do say, man, my story's not as bad as yours. But then I go, hold it, stop right there. Because my emotional pain and your emotional pain is exactly the same.
Good point.
And it isn't until we tap into the reason why we are in that kind of pain and suffering that now we become common.
It's a very good point.
And so I sat down to write this book for very selfish reasons. The first book, okay? It was kind of like doing a fourth and fifth step in the program of, 12 step. So I want to take one last look at it, put it in its rightful place, and move on with my life. Well, when the book was finished, there was a lot of hype around the book because there was a lot of inkling that I was one of these guys that this guy had abused, and I hadn't talked about it yet, right? So there was a lot of hype and there was a lot of anticipation and all of that. And basically,
I'm sorry to interrupt. So others had come forth about this Graham James prior to you writing the book?
Yeah, he is a notorious, he's like Jerry Sandusky or Larry Nasser, okay? But there's an interesting stat around pedophilia. By the time a pedophile gets caught, on average, by the time he gets caught, he has 125 victims by the time he gets caught. Okay? So before my book came out, 3 other guys before me had come out with their stories, and he had spent some time in jail before. So he was out of prison when my story came out.
And did he go back?
Well, he ended up getting a pardon and then fucked off to Guadalajara, Mexico. And you know what Guadalajara, Mexico is? It's one of the biggest child trafficking places in the world. And so he was living down there when my book came out. Okay. And so like I really didn't have any idea the impact that writing this book would have until the very first book signing. When I left the game of hockey, all I had was a grade 12 diploma from Vanier Collegiate in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan. Okay. Wow. And I had more than half my life left to live, and I had no idea what the rest of my life was going to look like. Okay. And so I had little or no expectations that anybody was going to read this book. Okay. So I show up at the first book signing in Toronto, downtown Toronto, the biggest bookstore in all of Canada. Okay. And I walked through the front doors of the bookstore, and there was 400 people standing in line with my book. And I'm like,
wow,
what the hell are all these people doing here? Right. I didn't expect this. So I sat down and I start signing books. Out of the corner of my eye, I spot this guy in line. And he's got my book clutched against his chest, and his face is buried in the floor, and he's walking really slow. And I was like, I'm picking up on some energy here. So I follow him all the way in the line. He gets to the front of the line, puts the book on the table, looks me in the eye, and says, "Me too."
Wow.
So I knew exactly from that moment on what the rest of my life was going to look like.
Wow.
And then I went across Canada on this book tour, and I got completely run over by people everywhere I went. 5, 10, 15, 20 people at every book signing were coming up and doing the exact same thing, you
Wow.
know? And that's when I realized that by me finding my own voice and putting a voice to all of this pain and suffering, that I could help other people find their voice and do the same thing. And so basically for the last 11 years, that's what I've been doing, traveling all over North America, talking about trauma, mental health, and addiction and how they're all connected.
That's awesome. Do you speak in schools at all?
I speak to every sect, denomination, you name it. So,
Cool. And that's
because,
and that's your future path is to just continue doing more and more public speaking. Is that correct?
well, I've done 800 speeches in 10 years.
Wow.
So we're pretty much somewhere different once or twice a week. So, um,
Well, let me ask you this. If someone listening to the podcast wanted you to come and speak, how do they find you?
well, my website is called theoflurry.life. Theoflurry.life. And they can talk to my business manager, Don Roberts. And yeah, we're willing to go and travel anywhere. So,
And Fleury is Fleury, right?
yes, yes, yeah. And
Theo,
I'm on social media too. So all the platforms. So
awesome. Theo, if you had just one message to give to our listeners, be they addicts, recovered addicts, or families of addicts, what would you say? What message would you give them?
well, for people who deal with addicts, stop enabling them. Because the one thing that we're really good at, addicts and alcoholics, we're really good at? We're really good at collecting enablers.
Yep.
Because the more enablers we have, the longer the behavior will last. And so there's a great program that coincides with Alcoholics Anonymous called Al-Anon. Go to one of those meetings and they'll teach you how to deal with the insanity of the person you're dealing with.
Good point.
On the other side of the coin, because trauma is such a catalyst, right? And trauma produces all kinds of addicts and alcoholics.
Yep.
And people watch porn on the internet and gamble and, get in all kinds of messed up relationships is because of the trauma. Okay.
Yep.
And until you deal with that trauma, you're not gonna make it. It's as simple as that.
That's
Right.
right.
But here's the deal. We have become very aware that mental illness is an epidemic. We're very aware that addiction is an epidemic. But on the other side of the coin, we have the highest suicide rates in the history of our planet. So why isn't all this awareness being turned into action and getting people well? Well, it's because we haven't created a safe space for the trauma. And until we create the safe space for the trauma, we're going to see these numbers continue to rise.
Understood.
So how do we do this? Well, courageous people who choose a path of healing, they become extremely vulnerable. And what happens with vulnerability is vulnerability creates safety. And then when we have safety, that's when the magic of healing happens. And so to the addict and the alcoholic and the person who struggles is, I always say, tell your story. It's your story and it's nobody else's story. And you get to tell your story whichever way you want to tell it. And if you hold this story inside of you, it is going to cause you all kinds of problems.
Yep.
Disease, cancer, diabetes, stress, you name it, okay?
Yep.
Emotionally, it's going to stunt your growth, okay? You know, I've been sober for 14 years. I started drinking when I was 15, so I'm only 29 years old, basically. Because they say the day you start drinking is the day you stop maturing, right?
Yep.
And so, and I, you know, and I love all these mental health campaigns because they say 1 out of 5 people suffer from mental illness. And I go, why are we shaming the one person who has mental illness? Right?
Mm-hmm.
Why are we isolating them and making them feel worse than they already feel? And so I say, if you suffer from some sort of mental illness, guess what? You're in the majority, not the minority. Okay?
Interesting.
And it's 5 and 5. It's all of us. Right? And we're all in this together.
Well, that's for sure.
Yes.
You know, Theo, I think that you must have helped thousands and thousands of people by all the public speaking that you do. And I super appreciate you being willing to come on the podcast and share your story because, as you say, sharing your story is huge. And your story is going to resonate with some of our listeners. And the hope is that they will then reach out for treatment for themselves or for others and, you know, get better.
Yeah.
So thank you for taking the time to be with us.
You know, this is, and I'll just share one last thing with you.
Absolutely.
You know, pain is the greatest motivator for change. Okay? And I could have spent the rest of my life having a pity party, right?
Right.
Pour me another drink, right? But I had to look at those experiences from a different lens. Okay. And I realized that the universe picked me. Okay. And, you know, my parents and their struggles was supposed to be a part of my life. My abuser was supposed to be a part of my life. Because the universe knew that I would figure it out. And then I would take that knowledge, that experience of overcoming those obstacles, and then in turn, give it back. Because whatever you get, you got to give it away. Because why would you go through it if there wasn't a purpose at the end of it? And so, you know, I have all this memorabilia behind me, which, you know, sort of showcases the first half of my life. But the second half of my life is really what's going to it's what's going to really count. Right?
Yep.
And, you know, I would trade all this stuff behind me to help one person find their way and find their path to healing, because there has been nothing more rewarding in my whole entire life than helping people. And helping is healing.
Exactly.
And the more people I've helped, the more I've healed myself. It's that simple. It's not rocket science.
Nope.
And
It's very true.
And it's just basic relationship stuff. You know, I call myself an expert in relational trauma because the only way out of this is to find people who can help you find your way.
Yep.
And it's, you know, it's,
and then
it's
I think beyond that is to find people that you can then help, which is what you're doing. Because when you start helping other people, that's major. I mean, that's what it's all about.
And you'll never, if you help people, you will never drink or do a drug ever again in the history of your life. And
that's
it's, you know, it's that simple. It's that basic.
It's that powerful.
Yeah, for sure. You know.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. Thank you so much for taking the time. I so appreciate you telling your story.
What you're doing is you're also creating a safe space for conversation, and conversation and relationship, you know, is the magic formula. It's the magic pill, you know.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of us, you know, go through life thinking that we're completely alone in our pain and suffering, and you know, we're not. We're in the majority.
Exactly. Cool. Thanks again.
My pleasure.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with Theo Flurry. You know, his story of sexual abuse is really quite harrowing. He's made it beyond that, which I think is huge. His book, as he mentioned, is called Playing with Fire. It is a best-selling autobiography. If you want to check it out, I'm fairly certain that it's available. Well, I think he said it was available on Amazon. He, you know, is living a successful life at this point. So thank you for listening. Just a reminder that we would appreciate it if you would subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you would also check out our YouTube channel and subscribe on YouTube, and give us a good rating if you can. In our next episode, we will be re-interviewing Wes Geer, former rock star and the head of Rock to Recovery. So come back and listen again. And please, if you need help or if you have a loved one that needs help, please do something about it now. Just reach out. You know, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again. You can call Narconon Ojai, and it's a completely anonymous phone call. You don't have to give your name. You can ask any question you want to ask. That number is 1-866-231-5924. But sometimes the hardest thing to do is to ask for help, and that's where you have to start. So please don't wait. Do it today.
You have been listening to the Addiction Podcast, Point of No Return, sponsored by Narconon Ojai. For more information on Narconon Ojai, call 866-231-5924 or visit www.narcononojai.org. Narconon is a non-12-step rehabilitation program based on the works of L. Ron Hubbard.